The night Owen set a manila folder on my kitchen table and told me to sign the papers inside, he smiled like it was already done. That smile. I'd known it since he was 9 years old. The one he wore when he'd already made up his mind and was just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. It used to make me proud. He was decisive, confident, his father's son in that way, or so I thought. "The house is more than you can handle alone, Mom," he said, sitting down across from me. Cynthia stayed near the doorway, her coat still on, her eyes moving around the kitchen in that way she had. Cataloging things, the way you do when you're trying to figure out what something is worth. I had a real estate attorney look over everything. "If you list now, before spring, you'll get a strong price. This market won't wait." I didn't touch the folder. I put my hands around my mug of tea instead. "Your father and I bought this house in 1987, I said. "We raised you here." Owen leaned forward slightly, his forearms on the table. "I know. And it's a beautiful home. But you've got 3 bedrooms, a yard you can barely keep up with, and a furnace that's going to need replacing next winter. It's just practical, Mom." Practical. That word landed the way he intended it to. Reasonable, unarguable. The kind of word that makes you feel foolish for resisting. Cynthia spoke from the doorway. "We're just trying to help." She said it gently, but she was still looking at the shelves above the refrigerator where Henry kept his cookbooks, not at me. I looked at the folder one more time, then back at my son. "I'll think about it," I said. Owen's smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes shifted, just slightly. "Take your time," he said, but his voice said the opposite. They left not long after. I listened to their car pull out of the driveway, then sat at the table in the quiet. For a long time, the folder still closed in front of me. I hadn't opened it. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Not yet. What I did notice, sometime in the hour that followed, when I was moving through the house, the way you do, when you're too unsettled to sit still, was that Henry's pocket watch was gone from the mantel. It had sat there for 11 months. Since the day I came home from the hospital without him. Henry wasn't a sentimental man in the way people picture. He didn't save ticket stubs or write long letters, but he had that watch. His grandfather's, a Waltham from the 1920s, silver with an engraved hunting scene on the case, and he kept it on the mantel because he said a watch that beautiful shouldn't be hidden in a drawer. It had been there through our entire marriage. Every morning I walked past it. Every evening. Now there was just a ring of dust where it had been. I thought back. Owen and Cynthia had arrived early that evening. I'd been in the back of the house changing out of my work clothes. I still volunteer 3 mornings a week at the library because I refuse to sit still and become invisible, and I'd heard them come in. They had a key. I gave it to Owen 2 years ago, after Henry's first hospital stay, so he could check on things, so he could help. I told myself Owen must have moved the watch when he was straightening things. He did that sometimes. Rearranged items without asking, then acted surprised when I noticed. But when I went to the guest room, the hallway, the side table by the front door, it wasn't anywhere. I found it 3 days later, in the drawer of Henry's old nightstand on his side of the bed. The drawer I hadn't opened since he passed. I don't know what made me look there. Something quiet. An instinct I'd stopped trusting, and then, standing in that bedroom, decided to listen to. The watch was sitting on top of a folded handkerchief, which was unusual. Henry stored it in a small leather roll, not loose in a drawer. I picked it up carefully, the silver cool and smooth in my palm. Something was different. I couldn't place it at first. Then I pressed the crown and the case snapped open. Taped to the inside of the front cover, right where the glass met the metal, was a small brass key, and folded beneath the watch, nestled into the handkerchief, was a strip of paper no bigger than a bookmark. Henry's handwriting. 2 lines. First Covenant Bank, Millhaven, Box 1147. Ask for Carol Nesbitt. I read it twice. Then I sat down on the edge of the bed, the watch in one hand and the paper in the other, and I tried to remember how to breathe evenly. Millhaven was 40 miles east. I'd driven through it a dozen times over the years. Henry had never mentioned a bank there. Never mentioned a Carol Nesbitt. He'd told me about a business meeting there once, The winter before he got sick. Something minor, he said. Paperwork. I hadn't asked for details. I sat there for a long time, the house pressing in around me. Then I thought about the folder on the kitchen table, still sitting where Owen had left it. I hadn't opened it yet, and suddenly, I understood why. I drove to Millhaven on a Tuesday morning, when I knew Owen would be at work, and Cynthia would be dropping the kids at school. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I brought my ID, Henry's death certificate. I kept a copy in the fireproof box under the bed, because Henry taught me to keep important things where I could reach them, and the strip of paper with his handwriting. First Covenant Bank was on a main street, modest brick, the kind of building that doesn't advertise because it doesn't need to. Inside, the air was cooler and the lighting softer than you'd expect. I asked for Carol Nesbitt at the front desk. She came out from a hallway behind the tellers. A woman in her late 50s, trim, professional, with reading glasses on a beaded chain. When I told her my name and showed her Henry's note, she went still for a moment. Then she looked at me with an expression that was careful but not unkind. "Mrs. Dempsey," she said, and hearing that name, my name, Henry's name, said by a stranger in a town I barely knew, was strange in a way I hadn't expected. "Why don't you come with me?" She led me to a private room and closed the door. She explained that Henry had opened the safe deposit box 14 months before his death and had left specific instructions about access. My name, my ID, the key. He came back twice after the initial visit, she said. The last time was about 3 months before he passed. 3 months before he passed. I thought about what those 3 months had looked like. The oxygen tank by his recliner. His handwriting getting slower. The way he'd started falling asleep in the middle of sentences, then waking back up and picking up exactly where he'd left off, like his mind refused to rest even when his body demanded it. He had driven 40 miles to this bank and hadn't told me. I didn't say anything, I just held out the key. The box was standard size, metal, heavier than I expected, when Carol set it on the table and left me alone. Inside were 3 things: a sealed envelope, a USB drive with a piece of masking tape on it marked Lois, read the letter first, and a smaller envelope with the name of a law firm printed in the corner, Hannigan and Cross, attorneys at law, Millhaven, Osh. I picked up the sealed envelope and opened it slowly. The handwriting was Henry's. The same careful slant I'd watched sign birthday cards and grocery lists and tax forms for 42 years. But slower than his usual, more deliberate. He had been sick when he wrote this. My Lois, if you found this, it's because you followed the clues the way I knew you would. You've always been smarter than you give yourself credit for. I want you to remember that while you read this, because what I'm about to tell you is going to hurt, and I need you to read it clear-eyed. I pressed my lips together and kept going. About 18 months ago, I noticed something wrong with our home equity account. A line of credit I didn't recognize. I pulled the records. There was a loan taken out against the house, $74,000, using a power of attorney document I had never signed and never authorized. The signature on the document was mine. It wasn't. My hands stopped moving. I held the letter flat on the table with both palms. I hired a private document examiner. He confirmed the signature was forged. I then hired the attorneys at Hannigan and Cross to trace the loan and the associated accounts. What they found took several months to verify, and I waited until I was certain before I wrote this down. The loan proceeds were transferred, in stages, into an account belonging to Owen and Cynthia. I closed my eyes for a moment. Owen's construction business had significant debt, more than he ever told us. Cynthia handled their finances. The paper trail leads to her. Owen's involvement is harder to prove, but he benefited, and he knew. I believe he knew. I opened my eyes again. Outside the small room I could hear the ordinary sounds of a bank going about its day. A phone ringing, someone typing. The world, completely unaware. I didn't tell you while I was alive, because I was still sick, and I didn't want your last months with me to be full of this. I'm sorry for that. I think I was wrong. I think you deserve to know, and I chose your comfort over your right to the truth. And I'm not sure that was mine to decide. Forgive me for that part if you can. What I've done. I paid off the loan in full using our investment accounts. There was enough, and I've accounted for that in the estate planning you'll find in the attorney envelope. The house is protected. I worked with Hannigan and Cross to establish an irrevocable trust. The house cannot be sold, mortgaged, or transferred without your written, notarized consent. Not by Owen, not by anyone else, not by any power of attorney that isn't certified by the trust attorneys themselves. The USB drive contains every record the attorneys and the document examiner compiled. Transactions, account numbers, the forged documents side by side with my actual signatures. Everything you need if you decide to take this further. I also want you to know this. The house was paid off last February. You own it free and clear. Whatever they took, they did not take that. I set the letter down and pressed both hands flat on the table, steadying myself. The house was paid off. I hadn't known that. Henry had told me not to worry about the mortgage in his last year, that he was handling things. I had assumed he meant they were current. I hadn't thought to ask more. He had paid it off. He had protected it. He had done it all quietly, in the months when he could barely drive himself to the doctor, and he had never once let me see what he was carrying. I sat in that small room for a long time, long enough that Carol knocked softly once to ask if I needed anything. I told her I was fine. I wasn't, but I was steady. That's different. I didn't go home that night. I drove to a motel a few miles outside of Millhaven, a plain place with clean sheets and a desk lamp, and I spent the evening going through the USB drive. Henry had organized everything the way he organized everything. Folders within folders, labeled clearly, dated. He had been a civil engineer for 30 years, and that same precision had apparently extended to documenting his own son's betrayal. I read through the transaction records. The loan had been taken out in November, nearly 2 years before Henry died. The money had moved in 4 transfers over 6 weeks into a business checking account in the name of Cynthia's Interior Design, LLC, a business she always talked about vaguely, never in specifics. There were emails, too. Between Cynthia and a notary public. Between Cynthia and a loan officer at a regional bank I'd never heard of. The language was businesslike, careful. She was not a careless person. One email stopped me. Cynthia to the loan officer, 3 days before closing. The property owners are elderly and in declining health. The primary holder is currently hospitalized. This is a straightforward equity extraction. Proceeds will be used for property improvements and business investment. Please confirm the wire instructions. I read it twice. Elderly and in declining health. Not his name, not our 42 years, not the home we'd built together from a fixer-upper with mismatched floors and a leaking roof, just a category, a resource. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark. I thought about all the Sunday dinners. About Cynthia standing in my kitchen with a glass of wine, asking questions about the house in the way people ask when they're interested. How much had the back addition cost? Had we ever thought about refinancing? Did we have a financial advisor? Or did Henry manage things himself? I had answered every question. I thought she was trying to feel like part of the family. I thought about Owen, his practiced smile. Whether he had known from the beginning or had told himself enough partial truths to feel innocent. Whether that distinction even mattered now. It didn't keep me from sleeping, exactly. But when sleep came, it was thin. I called Owen the next morning from the motel parking lot, standing in the early cold with a cup of bad coffee. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom, everything okay? I'd like to have dinner this weekend," I said. "Saturday night. You and Cynthia both." A brief pause. "Sure," he said. "Is something going on?" "I want to talk about the house," I said. "I've been thinking about what you said." The pause that followed was longer. "Okay," he said carefully. "Saturday works." I hung up, got back in the car, and drove home. The days between the call and Saturday were quiet in a way I hadn't expected. Not anxious, not angry, just deliberate. I called Hannigan and Cross and spoke with the attorney, a man named Paul Hannigan, who confirmed everything in Henry's letter and walked me through the trust document in careful detail. He had been expecting to hear from me eventually. Henry had briefed him thoroughly. Your husband was very specific about what he wanted, Paul said. He wanted you to have complete clarity before making any decisions. The protections are already in place. You can choose to do nothing. That's entirely valid. And if I choose to do something, I asked. Then we're here for that too, he said. By Saturday evening, the dining room table was set the way I always set it when Owen comes for dinner. The good placemats, the proper glasses. The kind of meal that says, "This is my home and I still run it." The envelope from the safe deposit box was in the kitchen drawer. The trust document was beside it. The USB drive I'd translated into a printed summary Paul's office had helped me prepare. Owen and Cynthia arrived at 6. They came in slightly too cheerful, slightly too casual. Cynthia complimented the pot roast. Owen talked about work. I let them settle, let the food be eaten, let the conversation run its natural course. Then I stood up, went to the kitchen, and came back with the envelope. I didn't drop it dramatically. I set it quietly in the center of the table. "What's that?" Owen asked. "Something your father left for me," I said. I sat back down. "I found it a few days ago. I needed some time with it before tonight." Cynthia set her fork down. The movement was controlled, but I noticed it. I opened the envelope and removed the first document. A copy of the loan origination papers, with the forged signature highlighted in yellow. I laid it on the table between them. Owen looked at it. His face went through several things in quick succession, the way a face does when it's running out of options. Cynthia didn't look at the document. She looked at me. "I don't understand what this is supposed to be," she said. Her voice was level, careful. "It's the home equity loan taken out against this house," I said. "In November, nearly 2 years before Henry died." "We didn't take out any loan against your house," she said. "The signature is forged," I said. I placed the document examiner's report beside it. "Here is the professional analysis comparing the forged signature to Henry's authenticated handwriting. They are not the same." Owen hadn't spoken. His hands were flat on the table. I placed the transaction records next. Then the email, the one about the elderly property owners in declining health. Cynthia's eyes moved to it and then away, just briefly, but I saw it. "Owen," I said. He looked up at me. He looked, in that moment, much younger than 43. He looked like a boy who had been caught and was still hoping there was a version of this where he wasn't. "When did you know?" I asked. "Mom." "Not what Cynthia told you to say. When did you know?" The silence that followed was long enough that Cynthia started to speak. "This is completely." "I'm asking your husband," I said, not loudly. I didn't raise my voice once that entire evening. "Owen, when did you know?" He looked at his wife, then at the table, then at me. "She said it was a bridge loan," he said. His voice was barely audible. "She said it was temporary, that she'd handled the paperwork because you and Dad were dealing with enough. And you didn't ask to see the paperwork." He didn't answer. That was its own kind of answer. Cynthia pushed her chair back. "I'm not going to sit here and be treated like—" "You can sit or you can go," I said. "But if you go without Owen, and he and I finish this conversation alone." Something shifted in the room. Maybe the fact that I'd said it without anger. Maybe just the fact that I'd said it at all. Cynthia sat back down. I reached into the envelope one last time and placed the trust document on the table. "Your father spent the last year of his life fixing what was done to this house," I said. "He paid off the loan. He established an irrevocable trust. This house cannot be sold, mortgaged, or touched without my explicit written consent, notarized, attorney verified. It's already done. It cannot be undone." Owen stared at the document. His jaw was tight, his eyes were wet. "He knew," he said softly. "He knew for 18 months, I said. "He chose not to confront you because he was dying, and he didn't want his last time with you to be this. He chose to protect me instead." I paused. I'm not sure I would have made the same choice, but I understand why he did. Owen closed his eyes. Cynthia said nothing. The confidence, the control, it was still there underneath. I could feel it, the part of her that was already thinking about next steps. But the surface of it had cracked. Whatever she had expected tonight, this wasn't it. There's a repayment agreement the attorneys have already drafted, I said. $74,000, structured over 5 years. If you agree to it and execute it faithfully, I will not pursue this criminally. That is my choice to make and no one else's, and I have thought about it carefully. And if we don't agree, Cynthia said. Then I will pursue it, I said simply. Paul Hannigan's number is on the last page. No one spoke. Owen picked up the trust document with both hands and read it slowly. When he set it down, he didn't look at Cynthia. He looked at me. I'm sorry, Mom, he said. And it was the right kind of sorry. Not the kind that asks for something in return, not the kind performing for an audience. Just the word, with nothing attached to it. I know, I said. Cynthia stood up shortly after. She said she needed air. She took her purse and went outside, and the door clicked shut behind her. Through the window, I watched her stand at the edge of the driveway, her phone in her hand, her back to the house. Owen didn't follow her. He sat at my dining room table. In the house, his father, and I bought the year he was 4 years old, and he cried the way men cry when they've been holding something too long and finally can't anymore. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet and steady, the way grief actually looks when there's no performance in it. I didn't reach for him. I didn't tell him it was all right, because it wasn't all right. Not yet. I sat across from him and I let him feel the full weight of what he'd done, because that was the only way forward that meant anything. After a while, he wiped his face with the back of his hand. What do I do? He asked. You sign the repayment agreement, I said. You handle your marriage however you need to handle it. You don't come to this house without calling first anymore. And you give it time. How much time? He asked. As much as it takes, I said. That was 7 months ago. Owen signed the repayment agreement 2 weeks after that dinner. He and Cynthia are separated now. I don't know the details and I haven't asked. What I know is that the first payment came on time, and so did the second and the third. He calls every Sunday. He never used to call unless he wanted something. Now he calls to ask how I am, and sometimes we talk for an hour about nothing important. The library, his kids, a book he finished, a memory he had of Henry. Small things. The kind that build something slowly, the way mortar dries between bricks. Not flashy, not fast, but solid if you're patient. He came to the house last month, alone, on a Saturday afternoon. He brought a casserole he'd made himself, badly. Too much salt, edges dried out, and we laughed about it, which was the first time in nearly a year that laughing with him had felt like the real thing. Before he left, he stood in the doorway for a moment and looked around the living room. At the photographs. At the shelves Henry built along the back wall the summer Owen turned 12. At the mantel where the pocket watch sat again. I had put it back the day I came home from Millhaven, exactly where it had always been. I'm glad you kept the house, Owen said quietly. Your father made sure of it, I said. Owen nodded slowly. He looked at the watch for a long moment without speaking. He was always 10 steps ahead, he said. I thought about Henry driving 40 miles to a bank, in a town neither of us ever talked much about, carrying a secret that must have weighed more than the watch itself. I thought about him taping that small brass key inside the case with the same careful hands that had fixed every broken thing in this house for 4 decades. The same hands that had held mine in the hospital at the end, steady even then. He was, I said. After Owen left, I went to the mantel and held the watch for a moment, the silver cool and solid in my palm. I pressed the crown and the case opened. The space where the key had been was empty now. I'd left it at the bank, where Carol Nesbitt had returned it to the box, alongside the documents, everything in its proper place. But the watch still kept time. It always had. I closed the case and set it back on the mantel, right in the center, where the ring of dust had waited patiently all those months. Henry had said a watch that beautiful shouldn't be hidden in a drawer, and he was right. He was right about most things, in the end. Even the things he couldn't quite bring himself to say out loud, while he was still here to say them. I stood there a moment longer than I needed to, my hand resting lightly on the mantel, the house quiet around me. Then I went to the kitchen to put the kettle on, because the afternoon was cold and the house was mine, and I had learned, finally, not to take either of those things for granted.